What's a fact that sounds like a conspiracy theory? Probably going to be buried, but this one is actually kind of funny. Sometime after WW2, the US was doing some pretty wild experiments, including trying to see if they could teach dolphins to talk. They believed this was only achievable by full immersion, so they built a house and filled it with water and had a researcher live with the dolphin. The dolphin was a young male and wouldn't respond to anything unless the female researcher jacked it off. It became too obsessed with the researcher, and I think when the higher-ups found out what was going on, they shut it down and never tried again. Kind of paraphrased, but yeah. The government paid a fuckload of money just to end up having a lady whack off a dolphin. In the 60s and 70s, thousands of Native American women were sterilized without their consent as part of a practice to sterilize poor and minority women to help their financial situation and their families' quality of life by preventing unwanted pregnancies in poor communities. Some were not informed at all and had it done to them completely without their knowledge. Others were threatened with having their healthcare taken away if they did not agree to have it done to them. Some studies estimate that as many as 25 to 50% of Native American women were sterilized in the 1970s, representing tens of thousands of victims. This is essentially a modern-day genocide in the United States. In the spring of 1968, President Lyndon Johnson shocked the nation when he announced that he would not seek election to a second full term that November. He gave no explanation. And pretty much everyone assumed that it was because of the situation in Vietnam and his resulting unpopularity. While Vietnam undoubtedly was a factor, it was far from the full story. Concerned that males in his family tended to die young, and having barely survived a heart attack in the 1950s, sometime in 1967 Johnson had commissioned a top-secret actuarial study to determine his likely lifespan. After carefully going through his family history and medical records, the actuaries concluded that Johnson was unlikely to survive to age 65. Johnson quickly did the math and realized that would give him a very short retirement if he ran and won in 1968, as he'd be 64 at the end of the term. This led him to decide against running. The actuaries were right, as Johnson never made it to 65, dying at age 64. And indeed, it would have been a very short retirement. Had he served a second full term, he would have died less than 24 hours after the end of the term. Earthworms are an invasive species and ruin our forests. Passenger pigeons were the species of land vertebrate with the highest population to ever exist. At 6 billion, we killed every last one in about 100 years. Every time you see a town in the United States called Pigeon Forge or Pigeon Bend ECT, you'll normally see a place named after the most prolific species to ever exist. They were the primary source of protein the world over, and only following their extinction did fish become so. They were a keystone species, and entire ecosystems are still suffering the shockwave of their extinction. You know those sticky briars that cling to your clothes and kill your pet if they eat them when you walk through the woods? Well, they ate them, you know, Lyme disease? Well, there wasn't food on the forest floor for vermin, so it doesn't crop up till they died either. All those weird nursery rhymes with pictures of pies with bird feet sticking out. That's them too. How America wanted the pigeon as its national bird before the eagle, that's them. And today, until you read this, you probably didn't even know that America lost its single most identifiable species, a defining feature of our continent, and no one cares. The more you know. For my job, I had a far-right boss who had his own talk show that promoted a lot of false news and misinformation. He was doing it out of money from his own pocket, until he got funding and a platform from a new online video platform that was filled with that kind of false news and misinformation. When I was CC'd in the emails, I discovered the source, a local billionaire whose name was on a bunch of buildings and university departments. His money came through a numbered corporation, e.g., a third-party business with a number for a name, to remain anonymous. That billionaire was apparently actively funneling money to misinformation and false media outlets to promote stuff like climate change denial, vaccine skepticism, false news about politicians, flat earthism, etc. Because of the numbered corporation, the billionaire was covering up his tracks, and that made it super difficult to trace. Because he knew that if word got out, there'd be a big scandal and he'd lose a lot of his status. He eventually died, so all this became a moot point. And as a result, the funding stopped immediately. Before, I wasn't sure if this kind of stuff was a conspiracy theory due to society's distrust of billionaires. But after seeing that and getting CC'd on the email exchanges, I am now 100% sure that this happens out there. In the late 80s, police discovered a group called the Finders that were investigated for kidnapping children. They had political ties, high-ranking members in the CIA, owned businesses that were covers for spying on politicians, and owned row houses with underground tunnels that had evidence of satanic rituals, children's items and security measures to tip them off if there was an intruder. All of this is factual and can be found on the FBI website. If you're into conspiracy theories, it's wild. You have to get past the first 75 or so pages to really see how this one group seemingly ties into everything from Epstein-type child sex slavery to the conspiracy of maids acting as spies for personal interest groups that want to influence the government. The founder of the Finders had ties to the man responsible for creating the Federal Reserve and ties into the conspiracy of drugging people in flop houses with experimental drugs. Things you can find in the files: police detectives asking FBI agents if they're stepping on the wrong people's toes and being told yes. Government agencies trashing warehouses the Finders owned before police could get there. Evidence of children taking part in ritual killing of animals, and even bills of sale for children from various countries that were later destroyed. Shortly after JFK's assassination, his favorite mistress, artist Mary Pincho Meyer, was also assassinated while on a walk in Georgetown. It was an execution-style killing, one bullet to the chest, another to the head. She had no purse and was not sexually assaulted. Her ex-husband, Cord Meyer, worked for the CIA. Mary was known to disbelieve the conclusions of the Warren Report and the lone gunman theory. After her murder, the CIA's head of counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton, was caught breaking into her studio, trying to locate her diary. He eventually found it with the help of Mary's sister and brother-in-law and supposedly destroyed it. A black man, Ray Crump, was found in the vicinity of Mary's body and was arrested for murder, despite no forensic evidence linking him to the crime. He was defended by famed civil rights lawyer W. Johnson Roundtree, who ripped the prosecution's case to shreds. Crump was acquitted. During the case, future Washington Post editor and JFK pal, Ben Bradlee, lied on the witness stand. He told the court he had no further information of interest to the case, omitting his knowledge of Angleton's attempts to destroy potential evidence. You see, Bradlee was the brother-in-law who helped Angleton locate the diary. He was married to Toni Pincho, Mary's sister, and Mary's studio was located on their property. Years ago, in the lead-up to the Olympics in Mexico, the country was embarrassed by massive protests about conditions for regular people there. So at one of the large protests, they put snipers from their CIA equivalent in some tall buildings near where there was due to be a protest by a large government building. That building was guarded by a line of police officers. When the protesters made it to the line of police officers, they continued to peacefully protest. The CIA equivalent officers opened fire on the police, making it appear that the protesters were shooting at the cops. The cops retaliated, mowing down countless protesters, thinking they were defending themselves. Protesters were killed and fled the scene. The government was ready, rushed in, and immediately cleaned up the scene. To this day, they have no idea how many people were killed at the scene, and no one knew about the plot to instigate the massacre of the protesters until years later. It worked though, there were no more protests. Will Smith was obsessed with winning an Oscar. He tried for years, but he just wasn't getting it. He destroyed his original popularity because he became obsessed with Oscar bait and winning Oscar gold. He tried Scientology, but that didn't work. So he makes Concussion, and it's not good. His reviews are bad. But he's so obsessed with that golden statue, he comes up with a plan with Jada to just call the Academy racist. This eventually destroys the Golden Globe Awards. But Oscar had another plan. As soon as Will tried with more desperate bait, they'd award him to get him to stop harassing them. On that night, Will was so nervous and wanted everything to be perfect. After all of his harassment and tricks and schemes, he'd finally get his award.